Currently residing in Brooklyn, Hala Alyan is an award-winning Palestinian American writer and clinical psychologist whose work has appeared in numerous journals, including the Missouri Review, Prairie Schooner, and Colorado Review. Hala was born in Carbondale, Illinois, and grew up in Kuwait, Oklahoma, Texas, Maine, and Lebanon. She earned a BA from American University of Beirut, an MA from Columbia University, and her PhD in clinical psychology from Rutgers University. Her doctoral dissertation involved exploring the experiences of Arab immigrant and Arab American survivors of sexual violence. She is the author of 3 collections of poetry, including Atrium, published in 2012, the winner, which gave her the 2013 Arab American Book Award in Poetry. Her second book, collection of poetries, 4 Cities, published in 2015, and that was followed by Hijira, which was published in 2016 and was the winner of the Crab Orchard series in poetry. And now the muses of Hala's poetry and academic writings have tricked her into creating Salt Houses, the elegant debut novel for which we have gathered to reflect upon. Publishers Weekly praises the characters and craft of Salt Houses, saying, "These lives, full of promise and loss, will feel familiar to any reader." Alyan's excellent storytelling and deft handling of the complex relationships ensures that readers will not soon forget the Yaqub family. Please join me in welcoming the ever-evolving poet, novelist, Hala Alyan.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. How are you doing? Good. I just want to say thank you so much for that introduction. That was amazing. I can't believe you guys figured out what my dissertation topic was. I was not expecting that. I want to say thank you to Politics and Prose for hosting this event. This is really an honor. I know this place is an institution, and it's really fantastic to get to be here. And thank you so much to everybody that came out, people that surprised me, who I didn't know were going to be here, and my good friends, and I feel a lot of love in the room. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book and how it came to be, and then I'm going to read a little bit of a passage, and then you can ask whatever questions you have. Okay. So this started as a short story. It was a time in my life when I was starting to work a little bit more on prose, and I've always been very interested in that period of time in Palestinian Israeli history, post-48, pre-67. So I was writing a short story about a young man living in what is now the West Bank, and sort of lost and trying to find himself and find community. And then I found myself really falling in love with his sister and his mother, and I felt very invested in them and in their fate and what was going to happen. And I knew as the writer that the 6-Day War was coming, and I'd spent all this time describing their house in the story, and I was like, they're going to lose the house, and I can't abandon them now. And it became very real to me. I was like, these people are they're my people, and I have to write the story. And so I just followed that curiosity backwards, and I followed it forwards, and that's how this book happened. It's basically a multi-generational story of a single Palestinian family. It begins in the early 60s in Nablus, in the West Bank, and it it starts with the matriarch of the family, and it follows the trajectory of the family through different conflicts. Like I mentioned, the 6-Day War. They end up going to Kuwait, follows the family after Saddam's invasion, 1990, as the matriarch's now adult grandchildren are scattered and have their own families and move to places like Beirut and Boston and Paris. And each section is written from the perspective of a different family member in a different point of time, oftentimes in a different city. Okay, that's a mouthful. So this section is Lina's section. So Lina is the original matriarch's great-granddaughter. She has recently turned 11, and it is July 2006, and she is visiting with her family from Boston in Beirut. So she's visiting Beirut and happens to be there when the July 2006 war begins. And so basically what's happening in this section is she's trying to convince her cousin to go buy cigarettes from the corner store, even though the adults have forbidden them from leaving the apartment because there's a war. And her cousin's name is Zan, and he lives in Beirut. It takes Lena 9 days. 9 days to convince Zan of her plan. They'll sneak out, get cigarettes at the Dikkane, the corner store, and be back before the adults know it. The last 2 weeks have been mind-numbing. The electricity cuts out every few hours like it does every summer, but she and Zan can no longer wander outside. They can no longer go to the video store down the street where the AC is always on. They can't go to Malik's to get ice cream or down to the beach. The adults have even forbidden them from going out on the balcony. Watch television, the adults keep saying. But whenever they put in a movie, drawing all the curtains and sitting on the tiled floor where it is coolest, they rarely get to finish it. They'll be halfway through when the adults rampage in, ordering them to move and open the curtains, yelling at them for the crumbs on the floor. Summers aren't supposed to be like this. This is Lena's refrain every night as she falls asleep. Summers aren't supposed to be like this. Summers are supposed to be about swimming at the beach and spending nights bowling and going out to dinner, and this summer was supposed to be the best because she was finally 11 and the adults had allowed her and Zan to go out alone. But now it's ruined. The war has ruined everything. The summer is just heat and mosquitoes and the bombings that sometimes make the windows shake. All the adults do is talk about evacuation and warships and explosions. They watch men yell on the television and shake their heads. It's been 9 days. 9 days since Lena woke to Zan saying her name, his face afraid. Something's wrong. Her first thought was that the adults had found the ants that she and Zan were capturing using sugar cubes. They found the ants? She asked, sitting up. He shook his head. No, something happened in the airport. Your mom says to get up. The adults are freaking out. The next few hours were chaos. Noises of traffic and honking below them, voices carrying from the street. The adults watched television and yelled at Lena and Zan whenever they went near a window. The news report showed the same images over and over again. Streaks of smoke from the airport, an old man talking about prisoners. Lena's favorite aunt, Khalto Riham, made plates of labneh and bread, and they ate on the couches, eyes fixed on the television. The conversation between the adults was cryptic and urgent. You don't think they'll fight back? It would be suicide. Thank God Mama isn't here. Can you imagine Mama here? They should return the men. I can't believe you'd say that. Without the airport, how would hush, not in front of the children? People are driving through Syria. The UN won't let this continue. When has the UN ever done anything? One of the men on the news wore a white robe. He had twinkling eyes and a long beard. Lena recognized him from posters near the mall. The billboard showed him speaking, his hand outstretched as though about to swat a fly, and behind him a landscape of mountains. Once, back in Boston, when she was at her friend Susan's house, they were playing in the living room while her father watched the news, and the bearded man came on. Barbarians, Susan's father had said. He spat the word from his mouth like an olive pit. Lena's understanding of all of this is half-formed, hazy. She knows there are good guys and bad guys, like in Spider-Man movies and the Sherlock Holmes books that she and Susan swap. She's heard her parents talking about Israel and Palestine, wars and land and people dying. Lena knows that someone is wrong, and this is why everything is happening. The airport burning, the men on the television, the rumbles that resound every few hours when night falls, just yesterday shaking a bathroom window so hard they woke to its shattering. She's afraid that she might die, but more than that, she's afraid that everyone else, especially her father and Zan, will die. And then she'll be all alone, like that girl in the movie she watched a while ago, who was left by herself after a plane crash in the tropics. The adults won't answer any questions. They won't elaborate. Only Khalto Riham pays any attention to them. Several days ago, she found them sitting on the balcony, swaying on the porch swing, and instead of scolding them for breaking the rule, she just sat down and read verses from her small, worn Quran. There's a war, she told them. People are fighting, bad things are happening, people are dying, and more people will die. We can't do anything but wait, and we are lucky. We are safe here, and we can pray. They'd sat out there for nearly an hour, the sun setting over the water, the sounds of traffic screeching below. But Khaltu Riham didn't flinch once, her voice strong and even as she went over the surahs. "Oh Allah," she said at the very end, "please keep these darlings safe." Lena has always felt different. Back in Boston, and even here, she feels her difference glow through, something phosphorescent beneath her skin. Weeks ago, Lena and Zain were getting ice cream at Malik's before the war started, when the most popular girl at Zain's school, Marie, overheard Lena talking about something. "You're not even Lebanese." Marie's voice rung out loud and sharp, several patrons in the store turning to stare. Taken aback, Lena stammered through an answer. "We have an apartment here. We come here every summer." The other girl's mouth twisted meanly. "You think that matters? Your mother's Iraqi, your father's Palestinian, with your weird accent in Arabic." A couple of girls behind her tittered. "You think your people deserve to be here? My mom told me all about them. Palestinians killed my uncle during the war." Lena felt dozens of eyes upon her, heard whispering. Zain froze like a deer next to her. And Lena felt confused, speechless. She wanted to say something about how no one ever really talked about being Palestinian in her house, the same way no one ever really talked about being Iraqi, that when either set of grandparents came over, they spoke of things like villages and bombings and old houses with a sort of mournful resignation, as though the places in question had simply vanished in thin air. She wanted to say something about how she'd never been to Iraq or Palestine, that she only knew Boston and Beirut, that this was her home in the summers, and Marie must be wrong because whoever it was that killed her uncle, it wasn't Lena's people, whatever that meant. But her voice felt ghosted, and so she said nothing at all. It's been 9 days. 9 days of bombings and hot afternoons, and Zain, please, please, Zain, please, let's go, until Zain finally says, "Fine, if we get caught, it's on you." They wait until the adults are glued in front of another news report, then sneak down the stairs of the building like the spies in their favorite movie, tiptoeing down each step. At the front entrance of the building, they peek around for Hassan, the doorman, but he is nowhere in sight. Lena steps out first, stands for a moment on the pavement, marveling at how easily they did it. "We're actually outside." "What?" she asks, noticing Zain's frown. "It's empty." Looking around the street, she sees that he's right. Many of the stores are shuttered, parking spots bare. The road is usually bustling with university students and older couples, men on mopeds zipping between gridlocked traffic. But now there is only a lone car driving along hurriedly, as though not wanting to be caught here. Lena thinks again of the girl in the plane crash movie. It's like something from a zombie film, Zain says. Where the world has already ended, Lena thinks, but doesn't say. She swallows. "Let's go to Abu Rafi's. He's always open. We'll go real quick and come back." As she turns left, walking towards the ribbon of shuttered storefronts, she can feel Zain's pause, his eventual capitulation, then hears his footsteps behind her. They walk along the sidewalks, past one of the fancy hotels with lushly flowering plants flanking its entrance. The bellman catches her eyes, tilts his head quizzically. She can hear him thinking, "What are these children doing out here?" She looks away and quickens her pace. There's something queasy about the air, a tar-like tension in the warm dusk. The few people that cross their path are men, scruffy-looking, tired, distracted. When they reach the enclave of delis and bakeries, she thinks for a moment that she was mistaken. Everything is closed, but then she sees the door, the faithful sign saying Abu Rafi's slightly ajar. Something is different, and it takes her a second to figure out what it is. The usual display of flowers and fruits outside is missing. Inside, an unkempt brown woman stands in front of the cheese aisle. Somehow, unmistakably, Lena knows she is a maid, Sri Lankan, though she is dressed oddly, in neither a uniform nor one of the pretty saris that Lena has seen maids wear on their days off in Beirut. This woman wears an ill-fitting dress, falling past her knees, the shoulders and bust too large for her. It is as though she just tried it on to see what it would look like. Her dark hair spiders past her waist, a handful of liras in her fist. The store is empty save for the woman and Abu Rafi, who looks grim and cheerless behind the cash register. Many of the shelves are bare. Sometimes, before the war, when she and Zain would come here running errands for their parents, Abu Rafi would slip them a Snickers or a Fanta, but now he just looks at them blankly. "What is it?" he says. "Tell your parents we're out of meat. Milk, too. We sold the last of it this morning. Those idiots at the port promised a new shipment, but the bastards have blocked the ships." Lena finds that she cannot speak. Their adventure suddenly seems so stupid. To her astonishment, Zayn clears his throat and steps forward. "A pack of Marlboros, the green ones." "It's for my mom," he adds, when Abu Rafi hesitates. The man shrugs and pulls out a pack. $1.50, he says. Zayn offers him a trickle of coins, and Lena watches with amazement as Abu Rafi slides the cigarette pack across the counter and into her cousin's hands. "Now run along. This isn't a babysitting service. Hey!" Lena and Zayn jump. They follow Abu Rafi's glare to the woman fingering a packet of peanuts. "No more wait, you understand," he says in broken English. "You pick something, you pay, you leave." Lena has never seen an expression like the woman's. Frantic, vehement. They watch her grab a motley of items, spicy nuts, a bag of pita, a wheel of soft cheese, with brisk nervousness. And something keeps Lena frozen in the doorway, Zayn by her side now, the pack of cigarettes forgotten in his grip. Something keeps them watching as Abu Rafi piles the groceries in front of him, punches numbers into a large calculator. The woman stares at a spot on the floor. 15, 23, 48,000 lira, he says. Then, in condescending English, "Now you pay." The woman drops the crumpled bills on the counter, her eyes still downcast. "What is this, a joke? This is 10. The woman remains silent. "Speak up. You think this is charity? You go tell your madame that she has to—" "No, madame." The woman suddenly explodes. Her hair shudders around her. She snaps her head up. "No, madame. No, sir. They left." "Well, that's none of my business," Abu Rafi grumbles in Arabic. "They left 5 days ago." Now that she has begun talking, it is like a levee breaking, crest spilling from the woman's lips, her hands moving wildly. "I wake up, they're gone. I wait. Wait for lunch, for dinner. The sun goes down. I stay awake 1 night, 2 nights. I wait. I take the laundry down, soak the rice, but they don't come back. They heard the war, and they left. They left." Here her voice falters. "They left me behind. Here. I've looked everywhere for passport, can't find it. I tried to call embassy, they say no one can help. They say stay inside, away from windows. I cannot call my children, I cannot go home, the food is finishing, there is no electricity." "We should go," Zayn whispers. But Lena feels rooted in the doorway, her flip-flops glued to the linoleum floor. Abu Rafi and the woman stare at each other. "There is no money," the woman says simply. "They left." The man's face darkens with anger, disgust, exhaustion. Exhaustion at his store being the only one open in this neighborhood, at another long day of telling people there is no more flour, no more milk left. 48, he repeats. Lena wants to punch him, or get out. "But madame and sir, 48, you think I don't have children?" He lets out a long string of Arabic curses. "You want help, you find it somewhere else. Not here. Look around." He gestures at the paltry supplies on the shelves. "Someone wants bread, they pay. Eggs, apples, cheese, they pay. They pay." Spittle dots his lips. "I help 1 Sri Lankan, 10 more at the door tomorrow." The woman flinches. She stares at the crumpled bills. With one hand, she smooths her wiry, bristling hair from her face. Her profile could be on a coin, the nose straight, the forehead uninterrupted. "The bread," she finally says. "Only the bread." Her voice could cool molten glass. "This is who you are," she seems to be saying to the man. "Look at this wrinkled bill on the counter, my unwashed hair. For the rest of your life, you will remember this moment and what you did with it." It is not until the woman has paid and swung by Lena and Zayn with her bag of pita bread as though they're invisible, the door slamming shut behind her, that Abu Rafi finally notices 2 of them still standing in the doorway. He looks at them for a long moment. "Go," he finally says. "Run along home." Thank you. anyone have any questions?
Hi, thank you for
Hi.
speaking today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for coming, sir.
Very happy to. My question was, also being from a diaspora family, kind of the anxiety that we have is that, as the grandparents die and so on, that there is a diffusion that might take place. And I was wondering if you could speak at all to what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, that's a great question. And one that hits close to home, almost as if you knew that would be the case. So in a bizarre twist of fate and timing, my family lost our matriarch a couple of weeks before the book came out. And I had, without even realizing I was doing it, written this book that kind of centers around matriarchs and memory and loss and identity, and how the generations that come before us really end up being what preserves culture in exile. And so I've been thinking a lot about that. I personally am biased, right, as a psychologist and an artist, and I think that storytelling and talking about these things and preserving not just our stories and our memories and our history, but like music and language and food and recipes. I think that's one way that, even when one generation goes on, those things can be preserved for the future generations. Yeah.
You have a hard time publishing this book?
Surprisingly not. I think I thought I was having a hard time with it, but I didn't know very many writers when I was going through the process. And now that I've met more, I realize that my journey has actually been, alhamdulillah, very easy. It was about like 2 to 3 years of writing and another year of editing. And then the way that I found my agent was just I started to look at the back of books that were similar to mine or had tackled similar themes and seeing who the authors thanked. And I started putting together a list that way. And I got like a ton of no's just based on the idea of so people, like, what you do is you send out a query letter and then you're like, if you want to see chapters, let me know. So I got a lot of like, this isn't the kind of stuff that we represent. And then I found my agent, who was wonderful, and it was a few months of editing, and then she sent it out to publishers. It was all told, probably from when I met my agent and signed with her until the book sold, like 5 months. Yeah. It felt forever for me, right? But like in reality, it was actually I was very lucky. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hi.
Hi.
So I see that your novel moves through real events that are happening, that happened, and the passage you read was somehow contemporary, 2006. My question is, were you able at this moment, when it was happening, to see the events in the eyes of an 11 years old? Or was it some kind of work to be able to do that?
That's a great question. We were in Beirut for the first part of the war, and my sister at the time was 5, and one of my cousins, Ahmad, was around 10 or 11. And I remember that one of the things that he and I would do if we heard, and just to be very clear, we were very privileged, very lucky. We were like up in the mountains. We were not at risk of anything happening to us. But at the time, you don't know that, right? So one of the things that I would do with this cousin to like reassure him is we'd blow bubbles every time we'd hear rumbles. And so I certainly wasn't thinking about writing anything at the time, but I do remember being very like spending a lot of my days around people that were much younger than me, in the form of like my younger siblings and my younger cousins. So I think that when it came time to write about this particular passage, I was 19 when it took place, and I just thought it would be more interesting to write about it from the perspective of a kid who's mostly just bored, who's like afraid and bored, which I think is what ends up happening a lot of the times. Yeah.
Hey.
Hi.
So the novel obviously spans many years, many places, involves a lot of characters. So I was curious, anything that you could tell us about your data collection process?
Don't do what I did, which is not write chronologically. And I've learned a lot from writing this book, one of which is the way that I had written it was I would sort of follow my curiosity and indulge that a little bit too much. So that I had a bunch of Microsoft Word documents in one folder that were like scene at the gas station, argument between mom and dad, like divorce scene, blah, blah, blah scene, infidelity. And then at the very end, I had to go back and like stitch it all together. I think for me in terms of, so that was like the actual writing, like the prose, the fiction part of it. In terms of the events, I asked people who had been in those places in those times. I was very nervous about writing anything that happened before I was born and like that I had no personal memory of. And so I made sure to try to get as many primary accounts as I could. I read a lot. I looked at old footage. I looked at old photographs, listened to old music, tried to get a sense of like Kuwait in the 1970s, like what would people be listening to? What would they be wearing? Yeah, it was fun. It was like one big research project, and I've always liked being a student, right? So like, it was fun for me. Yeah. Yeah.
Had a question about your idea of what home needs to change from when you started the book to
I think ever since my grandmother has passed away, I've been thinking about it a lot more than I did before, probably because also people have been asking me a lot in like interviews and stuff. I think for a very long time, I'd sort of resigned myself to this idea that like no place would ever feel like home, and that was okay. And that's part of the diasporic experience, and like it is what it is. And I think more and more I've been realizing that it's really more, for me at least, it's more of, I think of home as being in certain people. And so when those people and I are reunited, like that feels like home. And it could be taking place in Alaska, it could be taking place in Beirut, it could be taking place, like it doesn't matter. Like I look out at the crowd and see like old friends and people I haven't seen in a really long time, and like that's a version of home for me. Even if I knew those people in Beirut or I knew those people in New York, it doesn't matter. So I think it's kind of changed. My idea of the intersection of like physical place and identity has been evolving to get to a place where it's like, well, I think I just take it with me wherever I go. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. That was not the original title. I had another title which had nothing to do with the book, but I liked it because it just was what I was always referring to the book as. And then when I signed with the agent, she was like, you kind of have to think of something that is relevant to the book. And so I did. I was like, no, I want it to be called The Carnival Sky because it's pretty and that's what it's supposed to be. It was, so I did like a word cloud thing to see what words were used the most frequently in the book. And one of them, unsurprisingly for a book about displacement, immigration, was houses. And then there's a scene towards the end of the book where one of the patriarchs is reflecting back on all the like houses and villas and huts and apartment complexes they've lived in. And he's sort of thinking of them as structures made of salt that the wave can come and so like that's kind of his metaphor for displacement. And I was like, salt houses. Yeah. I didn't realize at the time that there's actually such a thing as salt houses. I like didn't know that until the book came out. Like, people brought it up to me. Yeah. Why don't I have an answer to that? I know that they are. It's like a kind of architecture that salt. Okay, do you know what that is? Yeah, it's a kind of like okay. But it's the shape of the house, like from the outside. Okay, that's what it is, Olivia. Any other questions or thoughts? As a therapist, I'm very comfortable with silence, so we can do this for like 10 more minutes.
When do you start with Nablus?
Technically, it starts with Jaffa, because that's where the family has fled after 48. And I wanted Jaffa to be the original point because when I went there, I just like fell in love with that place. That town is gorgeous. And I felt a very strong connection to it, even though in terms of history in my own like family. I don't think there is any. And then Nablus, when I visited Palestine and Israel, it was one of the places where I had just started writing the book, and it was one of the places where I could see, like, I'm very visual, and so like I could actually see the characters. I was like, oh, this is like where Mustafa can walk from here to here to get to his job, and like I could see them kind of gathering there, and I could see them living, and I kind of based their house off one of the houses that I saw in the hills. Yeah. My parents met and married in Kuwait. And at the time, my mom's younger brother was studying at Southern Illinois University. And in the Middle East, you get what your father has in terms of papers or passports. My father had the laissez-passer, like the travel documents, Palestinian travel documents. So my mom went to visit her brother and also give birth to me. So I got the American passport that way. And then we went back to Kuwait, and we were there until Saddam invaded. I was about 4. And we like my mom and me and my brother was in her stomach, I guess, went to, we drove through Iraq and were in Syria for a little bit until my dad could catch up with us. And then we were in the Midwest. So I was in Texas and Oklahoma and then Maine, and then moved back to the Middle East when I was 13. I was in like the Emirates and Lebanon. Huh? Norman, Oklahoma. Yeah, home of the Sooners. Do you know? Is that where? Yeah. That's where. No. Oh my gosh. Yeah. OU. That's where. It was. Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness. That's amazing. This is yeah, we were in Norman, Oklahoma. My dad was studying at OU, and my mom studied there, and yeah, we were there for a while.
As an American psychologist,
Mm-hmm.
with this background, what's the context in which you put this book?
What do you?
Well, you have the ability to make professional judgments about people's behavior, and you have your own life experience, and it's cross-cultural.
Sure.
So, what were you doing for yourself
Mm.
writing this?
That's a great question. It was very cathartic for me. I don't think I really knew what I was doing, to be honest. It's been after the fact that people have pointed out like themes of water and like mother-daughter relationships and return and certain I hadn't really been doing that consciously. So in some ways, this book is an interesting peek into my own subconscious, because I didn't really think of it as writing a novel. I was thinking of it more as like, I'm just following this family. I want to see what happens with this family. It kind of felt like I would sit down to write and it would just sort of play out. I think once it started to shape up as like a novel and a work of fiction and something that was a little bit longer, I like to think of it as kind of existing in that intersection of like character study, like a sort of character-driven story that looks at identity and looks at what it means to be part of the diasporic community. This book definitely doesn't purport to be representative of like the Palestinian experience. This is like, it's worth saying, like, this is a family that's able to leave, that has the socioeconomic like opportunities to go places, which is not true for a lot of people in war zones and in places of conflict. But for me to be able to tell the story that I wanted to tell, which is of exile and diaspora, I needed them to be able to leave. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you, wrongly or rightly, had any family members say, like, I can't believe you wrote me in your book, and I can't believe you portrayed me that way?
No, because I knew they'd murder me, so I didn't do it. I didn't. If you met my family, you'd be like, yeah, I wouldn't write them in a book either. I would not get away with it. I did sort of sneakily though take certain, like, I wanted matriarchs to be a big part of the story, and so that's definitely a focal point. I wanted there to be like intergenerational conflict, because obviously the younger generations are being raised. Like, if you think about it, it's like some of these characters are raising children in places like Kuwait, which isn't even where they were raised, where there's a whole different cultural script and like value system. And then those children are then having to raise their children in places like Boston, where there's a whole different so like that idea of there being this tension that exists from generation to generation. But yeah, I like did it sneakily enough that there's no one character that is any one member, but they're all in there. They just don't know it. Yeah. But I felt really connected to Yafa for some reason. My maternal grandmother's Syrian. My paternal grandfather is from Akko, and then like by way of Lebanon. So like they all have like Lebanese passports. And my father's family is from a village called Iraq Sweden that doesn't exist anymore. That's near Hebron. And also by way of Gaza. So they were in Gaza he was born there and raised there for the first years of his life. Yeah. Hmm? Is he texting you right now? Oh my God. Don't tell him I said anything about the characters in the book. Yeah. They haven't read it yet, which is going to be, I know. It's going to be fascinating. Oh, that's so nice. Tell him I say hi. Yeah. Yeah, they haven't read it yet, so I'm curious to see what they think. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? All right. Cool. Thank you guys for coming out. Yeah.